Thank
you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, as the member for Watson outlined, this government talks a lot about lawlessness in the union movement. And we've heard a lot today from that side about the union movement and how terrible and how scary and how they break the law. But we've heard much less about the rule-breaking that rips off ordinary Australian workers.
That's right.
Now, I will grant you that the member for Hinkler has been forced to acknowledge that unions do some good things. And the member for Ryan has been flirting with his own brand of lawlessness here in the chamber this afternoon. But what we haven't heard about is about the way this government is failing to look after the interests of workers by allowing them to be underpaid and exploited. Because that's what's happening out there, and Australians see it and they are concerned. In my hometown of Melbourne, we've recently had a succession of high-profile wage theft cases in the hospitality industry. Well-known restaurants, hospitality industry stalwarts who've been underpaying their workers for years. Now I, like perhaps many of us here in this chamber, started my working life in the hospitality industry. I've worked in a fast food franchise, in a cafe and behind bars. And I know that it's hard work with long, unsociable hours on your feet. It makes family life hard when you're working hours that others are not. And it's uncertain. You're often working on a casual basis and dependent on getting on well with your boss for your next shift. These are not the people who should be cheated out of their wages. And yet, on this government's watch, we have case after case of underpayment in the hospitality industry. To give just one high-profile recent example from Melbourne, the Maid establishment, which runs the Press Club, Ghazi, Hellenic Republic and Jimmy Grant's restaurants, investigated by the Fair Work Ombudsman and found significant underpayment over a number of years. In fact, the underpayments they claim occurred because they failed to correctly apply annualised salary arrangements for some of their staff, including by failing to conduct annual reconciliations to check that workers on annual salary arrangements were paid for overtime and penalty rates applied. And we hear from the people, the employers in these cases, that it's all too hard, it's all too confusing. Well, in these cases, it's the unions that stand up for these workers, who make sure that they are going to be paid. Maid Establishment has now backpaid $7.8 million to 515 current or former employees. But what a failure of this government, that on its watch, vulnerable workers were systematically underpaid for years and years. And instead of asking why, instead of trying to fix this broken system, this government focuses on trying to shut down the very organisations that support these workers, unions. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, Australians are on to this government. I've been struck by how, when I'm out and about in my electorate, I am routinely approached by people concerned about low wages and poor working conditions. And you know what? The people who are approaching me are grandparents. They're grandparents who are concerned about their grandchildren, because they know that their grandchildren face a very different working world from the one they held jobs in. They know that their grandchildren are working in a casualised, low-wage environment. They see that their grandchildren aren't going to get the sort of stable working conditions that allow them to take out a home loan with a bank, that allow them to have a decent family life, or to know that they can take a day off when their child is sick. And they see this government doing nothing about it. They see them coming in here day after day with nothing but smugness and attacks on workers and their unions. No plans to help protect young workers at risk of exploitation. Of course, Deputy Speaker, another area where workers are being routinely exploited is in the gig economy. Now, those opposite would have us believe that working in the gig economy is a choice, that people go into these jobs because of their flexibility. That may be the case for a very few. But in the main, people are working in the gig economy because they don't have a choice. Now, we know the Fair Work Ombudsman has looked into Uber. Unfortunately, that investigation concluded that the relationship between Uber and its drivers is not an employment relationship, and therefore these drivers are left with no protection, underpayment, no security. Across industry, across jobs, this government is letting down workers. And yet I've heard no concern today, no plans to improve the lives of these people. Those opposite, the member for Barawa, thinks that on this side we're ashamed to be associated with unions. Well, that is just not the case. We stand proudly beside people who are standing up for workers, who are standing up for Australians who want fair work, who want fair wages. And this government should be ashamed that they're not doing the same.
Yeah.